Oh, you got a timer? Okay, because I had a timer too, but you got a timer. I'll use your timer. All right. Well, just a little bit about me. First of all, hello, I'm Chris. I'm an alcoholic.
Hey, Chris.
I have 11 and a half months, so my sober date June 19th. So I have a sponsor that I meet with on a regular basis. Sponsor that has a sponsor. I have a home group, service position, and I also go and speak inside treatment centers regularly, just like Chris did when I first met him. Grateful to have the opportunity to be able to speak here for my family who's over there and their support. The sponsor Chris, guys from the treatment center, Honey Badgers over there. Honey Badgers. My home group, the Hot Stove, and the program at AA and Higher Power for keeping me alive to this point and removing the obsession of drugs and alcohol. So I'm going to just do the what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. It's the easiest way for me to kind of go about this. So a little bit about me. I grew up on the east side. I had two supporting parents and my younger sister. But growing up, I never really felt like I fit in with people. And whenever I was, with other people or in a group, I kind of always felt apart. And I also never felt really right in my body. Some of that's due to some trauma as a young child. And even though I had, the love of my parents, I would act out in school. I would get in fights. I used to run away from school all the time. My mom could talk about me jumping out of moving vehicles when I was a kid. So I just, wasn't very happy. Transferred schools a lot. And, eventually I was able to find kind of a friend group that I got along with, that I felt close to with. And it was right around that time, around 12, 13, when I had my first drank alcohol. It's like got super drunk that first time that night. And I remember thinking, I finally feel like right. I finally feel kind of whole and I want to do this as much as I possibly can. That was like a conscious thought, even at 13. And so, kind of things happened from that time and onwards. I kind of had two rules that I was going to live my life by. And that was rule number one, which was tell the people what they want to hear. And then rule number two is do what I want to do. And so, that kind of progressed into high school. Everyone knew me, but I wasn't really friends with anybody. Primary focus was, partying in high school. Just real quick, my dad, he's not here tonight, but he was a maintenance drinker. So he didn't, get blackout drunk and he didn't abuse me or anything like that, but he tried to teach me how to drink like a gentleman, which was, have one shot of whiskey and a beer at night and then stop. And that was just not something that I could do. And I remember stealing alcohol from him and he had like a half gallon. I kept stealing stuff from him. And eventually I was filling it with water. And I remember him, he found out and he wasn't mad that I was stealing the alcohol. He was mad that I ruined the rest of the whiskey. So we used to go to tailgate and Seahawks games together. And, I was even, drinking way back then, before I was 21. And I just remember, getting so drunk at the tailgate, like I didn't even know if I was going to make it into the stadium, or I would be so hungover from the night before that I would try to go to the game and like couldn't even get into the stadium. And so that's kind of how my drinking progressed. And eventually there was, harder substances that I started to consume as well. In college and around that time I was in college and I was working a job and I had to drop out. Well, I got fired from my job and then I had to drop out of college. And it was about this time due to my behavior that I got kicked out of my house, rightfully so. And I ended up I was living in my car on the streets or in a hotel or crashing on people's couches for the next 2 or 3 years. And, during this time my life was lying, stealing and cheating. I was consumed with, drugs and alcohol, and I was a slave during those years. And then everything kind of culminated up to a point where I was going south on 405 and I was in the far left lane and I blacked out at the wheel and drifted across 4 lanes of traffic in the middle of the day, middle of the week, and wrapped my truck around a tree off the freeway. I had a broken nose and nothing else was broken. My car was completely destroyed, and obviously all the legal repercussions from that. And things continued to decline for about a year until I got kind of the point where I was like, either I'm going to kill myself or something needs to change, because this is not any, I just can't keep doing it. And so went to the treatment center for the first time at like 2022. And what I like to say is that looking back on it now, is I'd given up, but I didn't really surrender. And I went to a lot of AA meetings, and I had the misconception that going to AA meetings was the program. That's not the program. Working the Steps is the program. Um, and I had a lack of fellowship. I eventually got a sponsor, but I kind of did the 1, 2, 3 waltz, and stopped going to meetings. And I kind of had this idea that, if I can just control my drinking like a normal person, that, I can make this work as long as I stay away from that other stuff. And so I kind of, I went back to drinking slowly over a period of time. And it was around this time that I met who would be my future wife at a bar. And, I kind of started to do the life escalator. So, met a woman, we got married, got an apartment, got a job, got a raise, got a car. Eventually we bought a house, more raises, more things, and during all this time I was empty. And what I didn't realize, that was going on, is that I was trying to fill a God-sized hole with, my own ego, essentially. And, kind of during this time, my whole thing was like, any problem, person, thing, it's, either I can outthink it. If I can't outthink it, I can outwork it. And if I can't outwork it, I can outdrink it. And, that went on for probably 12 years. And during that time, my drinking progressed to just drinking on Fridays, to drinking every weekend, to then drinking every day. And then I drank every day for 9 years, I'd say, and probably 3 years before I got sober, I knew that I had a drinking problem and had tried all kinds of different ways to stop. So, okay, no more hard liquor, just beer. Okay, we're not going to keep anything in the house. I'm only going to drink when I go out. But, it didn't matter. Whenever I would drink, I would binge drink. So I didn't, I wasn't drinking constantly, but whenever I drank, I could never control how much I was going to drink or when I would stop. We had moved to West Seattle, and I remember there's a bar out there called Beverage Place. And the first time I went there, I left my credit card at the bar. It was like 2 blocks. I would stumble home, and then, I was like, okay. And then the next time I went, I left my credit card again. And then the third time I left my credit card again. I was like, I can't go to this place anymore because it's too close to me. I'm going to just keep leaving my credit card. And I never went there again, even though it was the closest bar to my house. Over time, this kind of caused a great divide between myself, my wife, and reality. And, come April 2024, I found out that my wife had been having an affair with my best friend of a decade for the last 6 months. And kind of that illusion that I had built had broke down. And I kind of went back out in earnest with everything. And, what had taken 6 years to kind of accomplish, the first time I managed to do in 6 months. That included an overdose, as well as driving another car off the freeway, this time into a ravine and flipping it. And I found myself back at a place where, either I was going to kill myself or something needed to change. And I remember my sister, she came to my house and she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "What?" And we did this back and forth for like almost 5 minutes. And I just remember staring at her for like, I don't know, 2 minutes after the 50th time saying, "What are you going to do?" And I kept saying, "What?" And I was like, "Fine, I'll go get help." I entered treatment for the second time. And, at the time I had no intention of stopping drinking. I just know I needed to get away from it. And, from people coming into the treatment centers and hearing people talk, I remember hearing somebody say, when the way that I knew I was an alcoholic is because whenever I drank, I never knew how much I was going to drink, what was going to happen, or when I was going to stop. And I recognized that's how I drank. And so I realized that I was an alcoholic, and, started to kind of bring, kind of break down like my foundational beliefs of what I had thought reality was and what life was. And while I was in there, I met some wonderful guys that I'm, still in my support network now with the Honey Badgers, and those guys are here tonight, to support me, and I really appreciate that. And it was at that time that I went into their PHP program at Milam. It's kind of like Oxford for 3 months. And Teal Seals are the real deal. And one of the requirements is to get a sponsor. And so I kind of was like waiting for the right person. And then I just kind of said, screw this. I'm going to ask the first guy that sounds reasonable. And we were at a meeting. We were at a meeting, and, God kind of just put the right person in front of me. And he's like saying out loud, I'm looking for a sponsee. And so I went right up to Chris and was like, I need a sponsor. Will you be my sponsor? And that is when, things started to really change. And, we started working the steps, immediately. Those first 6 months, were really hard. I was going through the process of finalizing my divorce, and dealing with the repercussions, both legally as well as, with my work for the actions that I had done. And those first 6 months, I really started to develop a new spiritual basis, and a new solution to life. And really, what I realized is that my ego is what is broken, and that my ego cannot fix itself, and so it has to be something outside of me, which is in this case my higher power. And for those, from 13 until 36. It was my ego trying to improve itself, trying to fix whatever the problem was, and control the situations. Through working the steps, especially obviously step 4, I was kind of finally able to let go of all those things that I'd been carrying, around with me that had been holding me down. And start to find ways to develop ways to connect with my higher power. And what I've discovered is that the way that I connect with my higher power is by getting out of self. And so anything that gets me out of self is when I feel connected with my higher power. That's when I go to meetings and I'm actually paying attention to what somebody's saying and sharing. I hear what I need to hear, in the meeting, whatever it is. I remember I went down, I was like super worried about going on a trip for the first time while I was sober. And so I went down to Portland and I said, well, I'm going to go to a meeting as soon as I get down there. And like that first day that I was down in Portland, I was angry, discontent, and irritable. And I didn't understand why. And so I was like, I got to go to a meeting first thing in the morning. So I got up 6 a.m., went to this meeting like 5 minutes away and get in. And then the topic of the meeting was, dealing with anger, irritability, discontent, and early sobriety. And it's like, okay, well, so this is where I'm supposed to be, so it's kind of funny, we call those God shots or whatever you want to call them, but so, and then when I go to treatment centers and I speak, that's another way to get out of self, being of service. So I get to be present now for my family, and for my niece and my sister and brother-in-law, for my friends and the other people that have been with me in recovery. I know when I'm in a bad spot, I have a support network to lean on, and that I don't have to try to do everything by myself anymore. And that act of surrendering and knowing that I don't have the answers and I'm never going to have the answers is what's made the difference for me. When I wake up today, I don't ask what I can do for myself. I ask how I can help others, how I can help my family or another alcoholic. I'm grateful for this program, and everyone that supported me, and for God to show me how, a new way to live, a new design for living. So thank you.